Ciao everyone and welcome to episode number 2 of Voices of Italy. Today we're going to talk about something that is definitely a little less controversial than the first episode. We're going to talk about Italian food, even though Italians, of course, we take food really seriously. So that's definitely opinable. But I'm not talking about any Italian food. I'm not referring to pasta and pizza and all the popular dishes that people normally associate with Italy. Today's episode is going to be about processed food because Italy's influence on the global food market is definitely more extended than restaurant food or high level cuisine. Italy is pretty big also when it comes to the world of snacks and drinks, kind of snacks that you probably don't associate with high level Italian cuisine, but it's actually one of those sectors where Italy has some of the biggest giants of our economy. Stick around because this episode is going to be delicious and it's probably also going to surprise you. Italy is one of the most iconic countries in the world. But what does Italy mean to the world? What does it mean to you?
Buongiorno.
Pizza.
Ciao Bella.
Michelangelo.
Spaghetti.
Mafia.
Dolce Vita.
My name is Alessia, I'm Italian, and this is Voices of Italy, the podcast that peels back the layers of the Instagram perfect Italy to reveal everyday stories of authentic, surprising, and messy Italian life. Italy is definitely known for pasta, pizza, espresso, and for the general idea of food that is such an important part of life that we really keep it on a sort of a higher level of consideration. Sometimes that's also associated with our food culture, that we really give priority to the quality of ingredients, that they need to be local and they need to be prime quality. So I thought it was fun to talk about Italian food in a completely different perspective because there's a lot of Italian food out there in the global market that people simply don't associate with Italy, and on the contrary, they just look like many other international products. Actually, the reason why I thought of doing an episode about this is because I recently had a conversation with a group of Spanish colleagues from my work. And of course, we ended up talking about food. I think no two different groups of Europeans can be together in a room without eventually talking about food. And it was really surprising to hear that they were familiar with a bunch of Italian food that I've always seen on Italian grocery stores and never even took in consideration that they might be sold abroad as well. And surprisingly, they didn't think they were Italian. And that was very surprising to me because it's one of those things that when you grow up and you're very used to find those things in stores, you just take for granted that people associate it to your country as much as you. Some of them, for example, didn't know that certain Ferrero snacks were Italian. So I thought of starting with Ferrero in general as a company because it's sort of the Italian chocolate empire, which started really small from a bakery in Alba here in Piemonte, the region where I actually live. And to this day, the richest person in Italy is Giovanni Ferrero, the net worth of something like 41 billions. But the company is still privately owned and family owned, which is quite rare when you think about those global giants. And talking about Ferrero, of course, the thing that I'm very confident that is most famous in the world is definitely Nutella. Here, it doesn't matter if you're listening and you're Italian, if you're a foreigner, if you're another European person, you know Nutella. And if you haven't had huge amounts of it in your childhood, at least you know this sort of sweet hazelnut cream that is definitely a global icon. But for example, my Spanish Spanish colleagues, some of them had no idea that Nutella was Italian. And that was super surprising to me, really. I guess people can be a little tricked by the name because it starts technically with nut. But I think it's a Ferrero tendency to commercialize products in a way that they don't necessarily sound Italian, just in a way that it's more market friendly. But about Nutella, people tend to think about it as this super processed product, which of course it is, since it has to be globally distributed, but it actually comes from, or at least it was inspired by something called Gianduja, which is a local blend of chocolate and hazelnut from this area, from Piemonte. And it was first invented here. So it's actually some sort of industrial version of Gianduja. And the second thing that came to my mind was Kinder, which people probably associate more to Germany, if anything, because this word literally means child in German, but it's actually an Italian company that is part of the Ferrero group. And again, here, I suppose they just wanted a name for the company and those products to sound international. It was actually funny for me to learn that some of those products were so popular abroad for people my generation, so millennials or late millennials. One of the snacks that really was part of our childhood, but like it was something super common. Kids loved it. Was a snack called Kinder Surprise, Kinder Sorpresa. For my fellow Italians listening, I found out that that was actually banned in the US because a law that was essentially against not edible products inside food products. And that's actually why, at a certain point, Kinder introduced another snack called Kinder Joy, which in my child mind was some sort of upgrade of Kinder Surprise because it's still the same idea of an egg. Instead of being a small chocolate egg like Kinder Surprise, Kinder Joy was a plastic egg, half with the chocolate cream and half is just containing the little toy surprise. So that was not just a new upgraded Kinder Surprise like child me was imagining, but it was actually a commercial move to allow that product to enter the US market. Talking about Ferrero products, I think one of the most popular is definitely the Ferrero Rocher, those sort of golden wrapped little delicious chocolate balls that really scream luxury, or at least it's really the way it is sold and is seen outside Italy. I've noticed as well, probably because of the price, because it's so much more expensive outside Italy. I've seen Ferrero Rocher in the US and it's really a lot more expensive than here in Italy, but I have noticed that a lot of people tend to think that that is from a French company. And I mean, it makes sense. The name Rochelle literally means rock in French. And that's probably something that, again, Ferrero did on purpose to make the product a little more international. But yeah, that's probably another of those super, super, super popular Italian chocolate snacks that you see around in the world. But not everybody knows that those are Italian. Are you all familiar with Tic Tacs? Those little sort of super small mint candies. Those are also Italian, also part of the Ferrero group. And they're called Tic Tacs simply because of the sound that the box makes when you shake it. So they're really smart with names now that I think about it. But when Ferrero launched this product in, I think in the 60s, they were originally called refreshing means, which is definitely less appealing. But during the development, I think they just decided to change the name with the sound that they make inside the box. But going to other sort of Italian snacks, most of you might know that Fanta is Italian, but it has a really curious origin in the sense that, yes, when Fanta actually was born in Germany during World War II, the orange flavor we know today is simply wasn't there. It was a different product, it was a different drink. The orange flavor came in Naples in the 50s, which was the Coca-Cola's Italian division, and that's when it became the drink that we all know today. So it's technically not of Italian origin, but we made it famous adding our typical citrus flavor. Italy is one of the largest producer of oranges in Europe, particularly from Sicily, my homeland, that we are super, super proud of. One that actually surprised me, though, and I think it might surprise some Italians listening as well, is those loacker snacks, the crispy wafer cookies that a lot of us love. Those are actually Italian. They originated in South Tyrol in 1925. And this very region is, I think, the really most interesting thing about the snack in Italian is actually called more commonly Alto Adige, and it's very peculiar because it's an almost completely German-speaking region, and this is because it was originally part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire until 1918, when it was occupied by Italy. So that's why it feels like it's supposed to be a German product, but it's technically Italian. And that is why the package usually includes both Italian and German texts. But we cannot talk about Italian products sold abroad if we don't talk about coffee. And the one that I thought of mentioning here is Illy, which a lot of people might not necessarily associate to Italy because the name doesn't really scream Italia. But this company was actually found here in Trieste in 1933. Illy is famous for high quality espresso, and it actually is one of the global ambassador for Italian coffee culture. And actually, this is also an area from North Italy which has sort of its own unique coffee culture due to the history with the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Illy, just like Ferrero, remains one of the companies that are still family owned today, despite the huge size and success. But let's move to a drink. Aperol might not really suggest Italy or Italian as a word, but was actually created in Padova in 1919. And it's mostly known as one of the main ingredients of the spritz, a super famous cocktail that I have to say a lot of people know that spritz is Italian, even though, again, here we have a name that doesn't really suggest that. But I guess it's really so internationally known that most people just know it. But Aperol Spritz only became that big, really globally famous in the early 2000s when it was acquired by the Campari Group. And it's definitely the best selling cocktail in Italy. Lots of people drink that, probably also because it has a low content of alcohol. It's something like 11%. So it's much lighter than most cocktails, and it's also much cheaper. I can tell you by experience that it's definitely the most consumed drink amongst university students. That's definitely to go aperitivo, to go little drink at any time of the day that students consume, which I suppose contributes to the commercial success of the product. For the end, with the last product for this episode, I could not mention Parmigiano Reggiano, because when it comes to exported Italian food, is definitely at the top of the rankings. It counts for something like 40% of the Italian cheese exports, together with Grana Padano. So it's really a big deal for Italians' food economy. But I'm not including Parmigiano because, unlike the other products that I've mentioned, people outside Italy might not know it. I think it's also one of the most popular ones. But I'm actually including it because you might be mistaking something else for it. You might be buying something that you think it's Parmigiano, but it's actually not. And that's because outside of Italy, you'll often see cheese labeled as Parmesan. That's sort of a translation for Parmigiano that is used abroad outside Italy, especially in the US. But the difference in name is actually a big deal because Parmigiano Reggiano is made exclusively in a specific region of Italy around the area of Parma, Reggio Emilia, and Modena, which is one of the main reasons it was granted what is called a protected designation of origin status, which means that only cheese produced in this very specific region in the world, following strict production rules, can be officially called and marketized as Parmigiano Reggiano. Everything else that you see labeled as Parmesan, for sure, what you know is that is not the real deal. When you see something labeled as parmesan, it could be technically anything. It's not attached to a specific recipe or tradition or location of production. So the meaning should be that it's a similar type of cheese. So next time you're in the store, you know what you're getting depending on how the cheese is actually labeled. And I guess many of these brands are global, but they do not necessarily scream made in Italy as a commercial identity to appeal to different markets. So it makes sense that a lot of people might not really identify them as Italian, but also some of them were acquired by multinational companies, even though they still have an Italian origin or production site. And that's the case, for example, for Fanta, since it's part of the Coca-Cola group. And something that is really curious that I noticed when I was going through the list of little products that I wanted to talk about is that a lot of these products actually reflect the regional identity of Italian food culture, that it's really part of our identity. For Italy, essentially, each and every one of our regions has its own food and cuisine identity, and even our products sort of reflect that. It's if you look at Nutella coming from Piemonte and being this rich chocolate cream, and then when you look at the little locker snacks that are a completely different style aesthetically in the language and in the kind of flavor, and then again with Fanta that really reflects that production of oranges that it's so common, especially in Sicily and South Italy. So it was really nice to see that actually that kind of food definitely reflects a little bit of that traditional Italian identity that this podcast is all about. But I would be super curious to hear, independently if you're Italian, if you're a foreigner, if you grew up here or not, or if you live on the other side of the world, which one of these snacks did you know? Which one surprised you as Italian? And which one do you like the most? Share your thoughts with me, and thank you for listening, and stick around for a little suggestion on the topic. If you're fascinated by the world of processed food and want to see for yourself where some of the most iconic Italian products in the world are actually made, I cannot help but suggesting you guys to all go to Piemonte. This is the region where I live, and I have to admit, even as an Italian, I didn't know how many super famous and iconic Italian things come from this region. It's a perfect place for a deep dive into Italy's industrial history, also relating to food. For example, this is the region that is home to giants like Ferrero, Lavazza, Martini. Here you can come and visit the Ferrero factory in Alba. In itself is not open to visitors, but Alba is really a lovely city, so is definitely worth a visit. You can explore local shops that are selling Ferrero products available only there. But for the people that really love coffee, I think it's really cool to come and visit the Lavazza Museum. It's one of Italy's biggest coffee brands, and it has a really interesting museum here in Torino where you can trace the company's journey from a little small 1895 coffee shop to a global powerhouse. This is a really cool place to see. But that's not the end of it. Here in Piemonte, you can also visit Casa Martini, which is the birthplace of the Martini vermouth. That's super cool. So you can learn about the secret of the botanicals in vermouth and even try a little bit of a cocktail making class. I hope you like these suggestions, and let me know what you think.